Welcome to this fourth and final video on the Nameauth package. I'm using version 1.7. I would also remind the viewer and the reader that when I use historical names, I'm not intending to use them beyond pedagogical purposes. Please be patient and understanding with that regard. In this video, we'll be dealing with particles, suffixes, and other topics that help you get up to speed in using the Nameauth package. We will complete therewith the basic concepts needed to use this package, and hopefully you'll have a more efficient workflow, especially on large projects. Particles in names come from outside the English-speaking tradition. For example, here we set up the shorthand Soto to refer to Hernando de Soto. In the American, that is, U.S. English way of handling names, often the particles are included as the first part of the surname. In that case, you need to capitalize it at the beginning of a sentence. The cap this macro allows the particle de in de Soto to be capitalized at the beginning of a sentence without changing its form in the index. So here in the index, we see it's in lowercase. Now, unlike the U.S. English manner of dealing with names, the continental manner of dealing with names often does not include the particle with the surname. So, for example, here we have a reference to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Now, this reference will include the particle in the index. And so what we have is here in the index, Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von. Now, if we don't want to have that particle in the index, we can't put it in the forename field. So what we do is we include it in the optional name field, the optional forename or the nickname field here. And that way it will not show up in the index, but it will show up in the body text. So, for example, if we run make index, here the von is no longer in the index, but it is here still in the body text. And that's all the part of the way in which the Nameauth package tries to handle the case in which the naming requirements of the body text call for different name forms than those in the index. We want that flexibility, we want that consistency, and so we embrace, if you will, the horror of ambiguity. The suffixes are important in dealing with names. For example, the suffix Jr., when referring to Martin Luther King Jr., disambiguates the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. from his father, Martin Luther King Sr., and from the German reformer, Martin Luther. The first reference here has Martin Luther King Jr., and you see there's a full stop following the macro. So here's the macro, and then here is the full stop and the closing or inverted commas. The naming macros have a look-ahead function that remove extra periods if they occur after a period, either at the end of somebody's initials or after a suffix. So, for example, if we put an open-close brace pair after the macro, then we get the unwanted result of 2 periods, and that's because the junior has a period in and of itself, and the sentence has a full stop. So again, this is part of that error prevention aspect of the Nameauth package. Subsequent references are to the name King, unless we want the long reference, and then again we get Martin Luther King Jr., and you see here again it's at the end of the sentence, and again the extra punctuation removal works automatically. Remember also that here King is the surname, and everything following it, including that comma, is the suffix. And that becomes especially important when we start talking about royal names and mononyms and Eastern names. So let's look at these cases. Many books talk about mononyms as if they were forenames, and then royal names as well as forenames with optional surnames. Well, that really doesn't work well with the Nameauth package, and that's because surnames are a required argument. It doesn't make any sense to have mononyms be in the optional forename argument. So either a name is required or it's not. So therefore, the Nameauth package understands mononyms and royal names effectively as if they were surnames, and it puts them in that surname field, that second argument. And then it deals with the optional surnames, so to speak, with royal names by considering them as optional affixes. So, for example, this (1) here is the optional affix for Elizabeth in the reference to Elizabeth I. The commatized form Elizabeth I will work with the cross-referencing macros. It will not work with the comma option. Now the form Dagobert I here uses that optional final argument. It will work with the comma option, but not with the cross-referencing macros. Again, always delimit the suffixes with a comma. That becomes the most important when you're dealing with Eastern names. Now the revname macro and the other macros like it help us get names into Eastern order, namely the so-called surname, if you will, and then followed by the forenames, so to speak. You can reverse a Western name to be an Eastern form. You can reverse an Eastern name to be a Western form. However, the way you encode the name affects the way it is set up in the index. For example, here is part of that Nameauth environment. I have 3 shorthands here, Konoe, YAMT, and YOSH, and they stand for the naming macros that deal with Fumimaru Konoe, Yamamoto Isoroku, and Yoshida Shigeru. Now, in dealing with Mr. Konoe, he is in Western format, so his name comes up in the Western form of the index. So the other 2, General Yamamoto and Prime Minister Yoshida, they occur in Eastern format in the index, in the same wise as Elizabeth I or Dagobert I occur analogously in the index. So that's the difference in whether you encode them in the so-called Eastern or Western way. You can reverse them any which way you want in the body text, but it changes the way they appear in the index. Now, in addition, you have the, as I mentioned previously, the macros that capitalize all of the surnames, such as all caps active or cap name, and that will affect the names in the body text. However, that will not occur the entries in the index. If you want the index entries to be capitalized, you just simply have to type in the names with all caps for the last name. Nameauth can't be everything to all names, but it can be most things to most names. One additional thing I'd like to talk about is how you might disambiguate people in the index. For example, there are some cases in which Pope Leo I as Leo I might be different from Emperor Leo I as Leo I. Or you might have to put some kind of explanatory tags, especially in a history book, after some names. And so here's how you can do that. Tag name allows you to put in an index tag every time a naming macro gets invoked. So, for example, if you wanted to tag George Washington as a president, you could do that by this tag name macro. And then you run make index, and lo and behold, George Washington gets tagged as being president. And it's literal text. So, for example, let's undo that one tag, and we'll do it this other way. And then we'll run make index again, and now you see president is in parentheses instead of a comma, a space, and then the word president. So that's a way in which you can add index tags without having to do a global search and replace on any call to index that you might otherwise have made. So again, the Nameauth package saves you a lot of time and work by allowing you to do one thing at a time. Also, by using tag name and untag name, you can refer to either Pope Leo I or Emperor Leo I in the body text and have different entries in the index. You'll have an index entry for Leo I, for example, comma Pope, versus Leo I, comma Emperor, just by tagging and untagging the name Leo I appropriately. Again, the Nameauth package allows you to be flexible and yet consistent. It's these powerful features that help the Nameauth package make your workflow go smoother. There are a lot of topics in the package documentation, and I strongly advise that you use the documentation in order to deal with these many topics and these many different ways in which the Nameauth package might be used. It might seem bewildering. Proceed, I suggest, from the known to the unknown. Follow what your needs might be and then see in the documentation how the package will address those needs. And feel free to contact me if you need something else, and we'll see what we can do. But hopefully, with these videos, it shows how the Nameauth package will make your life easier in maintaining a name authority and in becoming a more productive author. Thanks for watching.